Jeffery Golden. Jeffery Golden is a specialist arbitrator, mediator, and expert with broad experience of a wide range of capital markets matters, including swaps and derivatives. He received an education at BA from Duke University, magna cum laude, general course, and PhD course in London School of Economics and Political Science. Jeffery is a chairman of the Prime Finance Foundation in The Hague, a member of the foundation's panel of recognized international market experts in finance, a governor and honorary fellow of the London School of Economics and Political Science, and a member of chambers at the Third High Court. He recently retired from international law firm Allen&Overy LLP, which he joined as a partner in 1994 after 15 years with the leading Wall Street practice of Cravath, Swain and Moore. He was the founding partner of Allen&Overy's US law practice and senior partner in the firm's global derivatives practice, and has broad experience of a wide range of capital markets matters. Jeffery is a general editor of the Capital Markets Law Journal, Oxford University Press, a leading OUP journal in this field, and has published and lectured widely himself. Recent awards for Jeffery Golden, his project, and his law firm teams include Best Newcomer 2012, Prime Finance Global Arbitration Review, Derivatives Law Firm of the Year 2009, Risk, 2008, 2007, 2006, and 2005 Derivatives Week, FT Innovative Lawyers Award 2007, Financial Times, and Capital Markets Team of the Year 1998, Legal Business. He has topped the rankings for derivative lawyers and drawn accolades from all leading law firms' directories. Chambers Legal 500.
Come in.
Yes. Hello.
Alexander.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to see you.
Lana,
Nice to meet you.
How do you do?
should we start our interview?
Let's do it.
Okay. Dear colleagues, today we're at London and we should talk to the first American lawyer who is at our TV show, YouTube show, Jeffery Golden. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Alexander.
And the first question, it's more traditional for us, is why did you wanted to become a lawyer?
Oh gosh, well that goes back, I'm told, a long way. In other words, family and friends told me I wanted to be a lawyer since I was very young. I think at the time I was watching a popular TV show called The Lone Ranger, and the Lone Ranger and his assistant Tonto were out trying to make the world a better place, a safer place, and I wanted to join the fight for justice and freedom that they espoused. There were a couple of things that became, that were clearly influences in my decision to become a lawyer. But you've got to tell me if I run on too much. First was my uncle was a solo practitioner in the small town that I grew up. He was a lawyer. He was continued to practice until he was in his 90s. He would still go into the office. Among the stories he told me was the story of my grandfather's will. I grew up in a very small town, but...
Sorry, what is your native town?
It's called South River, New Jersey, or New Jersey, as some of the people say there. In any event, there was a small town, but it had a big heart. My grandfather's will demonstrates that probably as clearly as anything. My grandfather, in his will, said that the first $250,000 of his estate would be shared among the family. But he then gave $1 million to cancer research, $1 million to the Heart Foundation, $1 million to the Red Cross, and there were a couple of other big bequests. Now that's all very good, except my grandfather ran a little delicatessen, a little deli. He had no money. He just wanted the world to know that if he had $5 million, that's what he would do with it. And it was really the fact that in a will, a legal document, you could do that. You could express yourself in that way. That inspired me. There were other stories of where I saw lawyers helping people get to where they wanted to be, to do clever things, and there again, I thought that's the kind of job for me.
Great. And where did you study law?
Well, I was a slow learner, so it actually took 3 universities to get me employable. I started my studies in the United States at a university called Duke University in North Carolina. While at Duke, I did what I thought was going to be a harmless junior year abroad, as it was called. I spent my 3rd year of university in London at the London School of Economics. Met my wife to be in the library of the London School of Economics, and ended up, that was the beginning of a stay in London that is longer than any other place that I've been. But I went back to the States and finished my legal education at the Columbia University. So it was Duke, the London School of Economics, where I had come back as a graduate student, and Columbia were the 3 places where I studied law.
Could you tell me what is the difference studying at London and studying at the United States of America, studying law?
Well, I don't know about you, because I know you've studied abroad as well, but the difference, curriculum aside, was simply the fact that I was mixing with people who saw things often quite differently from the way that I had always seen them. And that stretching of my thinking, I thought, was a very healthy thing. In fact, when I first arrived in London, the Times, the main London morning newspaper, used to advertise itself in the underground with posters which were largely black background but with one line of text. And I remember one at the time saying, "Great minds think unalike." And I thought, well, that's actually quite interesting, quite inspiring. So it was having my thinking stretched. But there were differences. Law in the United States, when I studied it, was very much being taught pursuant to what was described as the Socratic method, in which you were called upon, often in a large lecture hall, made to stand up, and a law professor who knew the subject a lot better than you did proceeded to engage in a dialectic exchange with you, which was certainly meant to help your classmates better understand the dynamic, the evolution of legal logical thinking, but very often left you feeling underprepared and embarrassed. The thought was that if you could survive that kind of interrogation in a large classroom, finding yourself in a much smaller courtroom, you'd be less likely to be intimidated by a judge when it was the judge's turn to ask those questions. Here in London, there was more of a lecture tradition, and it was more a challenge for the student to, in a sense, navigate the materials his or herself, less taken through that dialectic pathway.
Mm-hmm. And could you tell me about your favorite teachers, people who inspired you in the law profession?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I think in many ways I've been a very lucky lawyer, but not least because of the mentors, the teachers that I've had along the way. I mentioned my uncle, who was not a classroom teacher, but who was taught by example, and I still remember a number of wise things that he said to me about the profession and that helped me in the profession. But at the London School of Economics, I was in the first class taught by a woman named Rosalind Higgins, now Dame Rosalind Higgins. Dame Rosalind Higgins went on to become first a judge, the first female judge on the International Court of Justice, and subsequently the president of the International Court of Justice. And she was an inspiring, both by what she had accomplished and in her career, but also by the interest that she took in me and in my career. I had at Columbia University, where I studied in the States, I was the research assistant of a professor named Louis Henkin. Professor Louis Henkin is often credited with being the founding father of the approach in American law to human rights. And he was certainly a great inspiration to me. It probably didn't hurt at Columbia Law School that I learned my constitutional law from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who currently sits on the U.S. Supreme Court and has been an inspiration in any number of ways. And then, of course, the teaching, the learning in my case, but the teaching by others continued once I arrived at the first law firm where again I was mentored and inspired by some very, very impressive lawyers.
I need to tell a little bit secret because we are filming.
Okay.
This is the next day after our main filming, and I thought that we should try to show our spectators that we are at the same clothes and it is the same day. But Jeffrey thinks that we should tell the truth to our spectators. And today is the next day after our interview, and I suppose that Konstantin Kroll, one of our heroes of our interview series, he could be the best person who should have a walk with Jeffrey around the temple, and he could ask some questions about financial issues, about Russian law, American law, and English law.
Well, thank you, Alexander, and it's a pleasure to do this with Konstantin, who, as you know, was a former law partner of mine and a friend whom I have great admiration for. But I want to welcome both of you to, again, my professional home, and as you probably get a sense, it's like going back in time. I'm tempted to say not last century, but actually the century before that. And in fact, we're on an area here which features in any number of films. Right across the way here, we have a wall with the courts in the background, but some buildings in between. And that's a wall which features prominently in the latest Mary Poppins film. They actually dance across this wall, and any number of other films, because of the cobblestones and the like, have been made here.
Great. Okay, dear friends, I have to go to the meeting to another future hero of our Moscow Lawyers series. Nice to meet you, and
Very
thank you
good
for your
to see
interview.
you. I hope I'll see you again soon. And
Supposed to do it.
Look forward to seeing you.
In Moscow, it's St. Petersburg.
That would be nice. Either.
Thank you very
Either.
much.
Both.
Thank you, Alexander, and thank you, Jeff. And I must say, I'm really humbled and honored. I don't know. I will do my best because I have big shoes to fill in, and it's a new role for me. But as I have a privilege of knowing Jeff for over 22 years now, so I think that we can cover some interesting subjects for our audience.
And one moment, it is necessary to mention that Konstantin, he is alumni not only from our law faculty, Moscow State University, but from our business law department. I am professor of business law department, so it's very important personally for me.
Well, we're in good hands.
Thank you, Alexander.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a nice interview.
See you.
I think we can cut here, and we're going to go out through to the front of the building.
Yep. Jeff, so when I first met you over 22 years ago, and I was just a trainee lawyer, a rookie, and
But a very good one.
Well, that's very kind of you, Jeff, to say that. So you came to Moscow in the autumn of 1997 to meet representatives of the Russian Central Bank and the Anti-Monopoly Service and other senior authorities. And you were coming with a delegation from EMTA and ISDA, and you were talking about derivatives and other interesting hot topics that were totally new for us in Russia at the time. So could you tell us a little bit more about, if you remember that visit and maybe subsequent visits to Russia that you had, and your role with Allen&Overy at the time?
Yes, well, those were exciting times, Konstantin. I don't think we realized in 1997 just how precarious the financial markets globally, but in particular in Moscow, were, and that we would be going through some pretty turbulent times that would really test the effectiveness of the legal frameworks and the documentation that we had put in place. And I remember being impressed by just how clever the people that I met with were, and how keen they were to engage in a dialogue and to share experiences. And I remember thinking on that first trip, I can't wait to get back. Now, I think on the second trip, we actually had the privilege of speaking to the Duma about some of those issues that were before the markets, and our thoughts as to that. And over time, that led to further trips, including dialogue with judges at the Supreme Arbitrage Court. And each time I came, rather than starting all over, it was really building on the experience, the sharing of information that had taken place before that. So it kept getting better and better, and I can't wait for the next trip.
I think that I would personally very much look forward to that, and I think that many people in Moscow would be very happy if you come again and you come more often. As I understand, when you were visiting Moscow, you were talking about your experience with ISDA documentation, and for our audience, I would say ISDA is International Swaps and Derivatives Association. So that's a very big sort of market organization. So could you tell us a little bit more about your role with ISDA? Were you in the room when ISDA was actually formed?
I was in the room. I chatted a bit about this with Alexander as well. The fact was that at that time, and it's hard for us looking back to really put this in perspective, but at the time we were talking about an exciting, an innovative, a new marketplace, and that had attracted some really top talent to it, but a relatively small universe of players. In fact, I can distinctly remember before ISDA came to be, when it used to be that the every trade that involved a swap, a derivative, required a separate full-blown contract and a separate full-blown negotiation, and that most of that trading was happening either in the financial centers of London or New York, and sometimes because it involved players from both, there was a need to do things and do them quickly. In fact, the derivatives trades were linked to the closings of other financial transactions. Everything had to happen simultaneously. You wouldn't want the one to come into being without the other. They were, in that sense, inextricably linked. And to get from the one room to the other, lawyers were put on planes, often very fast planes. That's how I got my first Concorde flight. And when you got there, it was also very exciting. People scrambling in and out of rooms, trying to meet deadlines. But if you kept your cool and you met those deadlines, well, in that case, there were closing dinners and all the things that excite lawyers. I remember getting lucite cubes, memorializing the deal, and fountain pens and photographs taken. It was a pretty exciting world. But it was a very slow-moving, except for the deadlines. It was an intense effort to get each and every trade completed, and the market said there must be a better way. And it was really trying to cleverly navigate to a more efficient, cost-effective environment that produced first master agreements and then the consensus or standardized master agreement. That was an effort of a collection of investment banks, but once it got to the point that there was a contract that had been collectively agreed, there was appreciation that there would need to be ongoing education and users' guidance in connection with it. We needed an organization that would take responsibility for moving those things along, and that's when ISDA was created. I was in the room. ISDA stood then for the International Swap Dealers Association. It was just a small group of dealers who had really got us that far. But as the industry grew and interest in its progression grew, the International Swap Dealers kept the initials ISDA, but became the International Swaps and Derivatives Association, and today ISDA includes representatives of both the dealer community and the buy side of the marketplace, others, law firms, others, service providers to the industry, and it really has become an inspiring phenomenon, all of that effort going into not just producing but maintaining. It's like painting a bridge. You get to the far end and it's time to start all over, making sure that the product is fit for purpose. Others have attempted to do that on a more local basis and have quickly realized that it's not just producing a standard form master agreement. It's absolutely all the deal terms and economic terms and credit support and other variables that need to be picked up as you move from one product area to another that fits under the umbrella. It's a pretty ambitious task.
It is. So when it all started, Jeff, were you already in London or were you back in the US?
That's interesting you should ask. I was physically in London, but I had moved there from New York. I began my career with the Wall Street firm Cravath, Swaine & Moore. Got a posting which was meant to last 18 months, but 10 years later I was still in the Cravath London office. And it was only then that I realized that better really unpack those bags. This had become home, and so very open to the approach and invitation that came to join one of the home teams. As you know, Constantine, I'm a sucker for an English accent. I don't have one for all the years that I've lived in England, but I married one of the first people that I met with an English accent, and my children all have English accents. And so when a chorus of them said, come join a Magic Circle practice, it was an offer I could not refuse.
So you became the first non-English partner at Allen&Overy, or not non-English qualified partner at Allen&Overy. So what were the challenges of that, being the first in that position?
Well, I think it was a huge challenge, not just because not so much the cultural challenge of being a non-English qualified lawyer or even non-English. If anything, as you know, Allen&Overy was and remains a place to be admired, not least because of its the warmth of the culture, the any number of things, the humor in the hallways that always made it a pleasure to be part of the team. But the task that was set was an ambitious task, particularly for one lawyer, which was all it was at the time, the U.S. Law Group. The task of challenging the leading Wall Street capital market practices, capital markets being an area where Wall Street firms were arguably strongest, and as well the growing teams at the leading international practices, English law firms as well, and that was going to require more than one lawyer. So it.
So you founded a U.S. law group.
We founded a U.S. law group, which I understand now numbers in the hundreds rather than the single-digit team that it was initially, and you know, my hat goes off to the brave pioneers who responded to the rallying call of that challenge. We attracted some of the really best and brightest of the law graduates and If that wasn't demonstrated at the time, it's certainly been my view of that has been reinforced by just the successes that so many of the members of the group have gone into. This is the 25th anniversary year of the formation of that group, and we plan to gather in a few weeks' time.
25th, so it's the quarter century anniversary.
Quarter century.
Very impressive.
And as I said, it's been my privilege and certainly my pleasure to watch all that grow and to have a team that worked hard, occasionally played hard together as well, and certainly where the mutuality of respect was.
Could you tell me a little bit about your thoughts, about your dreams when you've been studying law profession? Whom you wanted to become? A criminal lawyer, or maybe a judge, or somebody else?
I think it fascinated me that around the world, people were prepared to put so much belief and so much reliance on very often what was really a piece of paper with words on it. So the freedom to contract and the power of the contract were something that caught my imagination early on, and later played a huge part in my career, because so much of my practice eventually became wrapped up in the market activity under the governance of a particular contract, the master agreement. But I think, there were along the way books, TV programs, films. I think you're either the kind of person who feels something inside when you see injustice and wish there'd be a better way, or you're not. Yes, there were any number of films. To Kill a Mockingbird is a classic example of one where you have to have a pretty cold heart not to watch that and not to be moved by the relevance of law to the process of justice, where the law can be help and where if the wrong people are involved, it can be a hindrance.
Could you tell me about your first steps at your legal profession? What was your first law firm?
Gosh, well, my first law firm, and I was hugely flattered to be invited to join it as a young associate, was a Wall Street law firm called Cravath, Swaine & Moore. Cravath, Swaine & Moore this year is celebrating its 200th anniversary. It is a firm with a tremendous tradition, and its legacy was its emphasis on the training of young lawyers, the bringing them on, the fact that the ties to the firm remain throughout their careers, whether at the firm or beyond it. But I must say, when I turned up to a firm, and you need to understand, more people worked in the building in which Cravath was located at the time than lived in my hometown. So I turned up, and I didn't have a clue what actually was going to be my routine, what lawyers in a firm like that did. All I could remember was that the day that I arrived, a stern woman came out of the HR department, and she looked me in the eye and she said, "Which department will you be joining? Corporate or litigation?" Well, I didn't know what you did in either department, but I asked her a question. I said, "Which one is the IBM case?" And she said, "That's litigation." And I said, "That's right, I'll take corporate." Now, you may ask why I did that. Well, again, at law school, everybody lived in awe of Cravath and strived hard. It was the highest compliment you could be paid to be offered a place there. But the whispers were, stay away from the IBM case. The IBM case was a massive, massive antitrust lawsuit, the government's attempt to break up IBM. It began in the last day of the Johnson administration, last day that President Johnson was in power. It got settled more than 13 years later in the Reagan administration. And it was such a massive case that young lawyers were frequently sent to warehouses with no clear instruction, or at least that's how rumor had it, no clearer instruction than to look through boxes of papers and shout if they saw something interesting. Well, years later, we joked that even after the case had settled, there might still be any number of those lawyers in those warehouses who didn't know that the war was over. So the challenge for me was to thread that needle, get to Cravath, but avoid the IBM case. And I took the corporate route, the transactional lawyer route, because that was the safest, the safe harbor that would keep me away from IBM.
What did surprise you most of all when you start your career as a lawyer?
I guess it was not so much a surprise as a acceptance and realization that there were no shortcuts. There was nothing to do but to roll up one's sleeves and commit in a very serious way. And Cravath expected that level of commitment. I worked very hard. It was hard for my English wife. I began my career on Wall Street and reporting back to her relatives how many hours I was spending in the office. I remember one relative suggesting, hesitantly, but suggesting that, was she sure I was working that hard? Maybe I was having an affair with my secretary or something instead. But in fact, that was it was that total immersion course, that major commitment that I think at a time when I was still impressionable, a bit of a sponge, absorbing as much as I could, really brought home the seriousness of the profession of law.
The first question. You were the founder of a US law group at a Magic Circle firm in London. What was the role of a US lawyer working for a major English law firm in London?
Yes, well, it was a challenge, Lana, because at that time, the expectations at the firm were that by bringing in a U.S. law capability, they would be able to compete more effectively with some of the leading U.S. law practices. There had been certain rule changes that made it easier for U.S. investors to be approached in connection with offerings made otherwise outside the United States. And that meant that there was going to be a U.S. piece to the puzzle, where in the past certain transactions had been organized in a way that they would not be on offer to U.S. investors. And there was, I think, a concern that once the U.S. lawyers got in the room because of the U.S. piece, clients might think, well, why do I need two law firms rather than just the one? So I think that inspired the decision to have a U.S. practice at this Magic Circle firm that I joined, Allen&Overy. But it was a huge challenge because initially the U.S. law group consisted of one lawyer. And to my mind, it's all about people and talent. And so even before we ran around knocking on the doors of the clients to brag about having a U.S. law capability, I packed my bags and went to leading U.S. law schools to recruit the top talent, I was convinced, and I remain convinced, that that by getting the top talent, we would have a huge head start over time in producing an effective U.S. legal service. I used to tell my partners it was rather like buttering toast. With toast, if you butter the corners, the rest of it takes care of itself. And it was my view that if we got the very best people coming out of the U.S. law schools, over time that would ripen into a practice that was going to be competitive with any other.
Okay, thank you very much. And legends tell us you were in the room when the International Swaps and Derivatives Association was founded, and you have closely worked with ICDA for over 30 years. Could you tell us more about your history with ICDA?
Yes, well, ISDA was really created to be the owner of standard form documentation designed to provide, to ensure greater efficiency and lower costs in the growing marketplace of swaps and derivatives. Now, let me go back a bit. Before that, it used to be the case that when parties entered into a swap, they required a separate contract to do that, and that was a very costly and time-consuming affair. Eventually, parties woke up to the idea, market participants woke up to the idea that, well, if we could create more of an umbrella agreement, that would have huge cost savings and other efficiencies. But different lawyers in different rooms were tasked with doing that, and when they came back with their work product, things didn't always match up, and so a battle of forms emerged. And a group of banks got around the table to see if they could cut through that, and as a young lawyer with a close professional colleague and longtime friend of mine, Dan Cunningham, we were given the pen to write these standard form agreements. And to make a much longer story short, those contracts now support, we're told, something in the order of more than $500 trillion of trading. So I hope we got it right. But ISDA, as I said, was a trade body that emerged once we had a form contract, and someone needed both to own it but also to maintain it. ISDA has grown, the industry has grown, and I guess what was just the luck of the draw in terms of the work coming to me in an early stage of my career has certainly had a huge influence on that career over what you say is now a period of more than 30, probably closer to 35 years, yeah.
Oh, thank you. And you are not a barrister yet. You are a co-chair at three High Court barristers' chambers at the Temple. And we understand this is to be the first precedent of a kind in some hundreds of years. Could you please tell us more about your work at three High Court?
Well, my work has naturally brought me to this side of the street because I spend a lot of time in courtrooms as an expert witness, and I also have an arbitration practice. Much of that dealing with cases arising from this broader experience of the financial markets and the complex financial products cases. So in a way, like all that sit around me, much of my time is focused on courtroom activity these days in a way that it wasn't earlier in my career. But I'm thrilled, of course, to be here. I'm surrounded by incredibly bright people who love the law. I don't know how you feel. But walking through the gates here into the Inns of Court, well, I'm a born-again lawyer every time I do that. It's a very inspiring experience. And growing the practice as we did at Allen&Overy and in my time before that at Cravath has certainly provided, I hope, excellent experience in law firm management and the like, and it may be that that has stood me in good stead in dealing with the issues arising here in chambers. I mean, the issues arising are very much issues for the profession as a whole, and not just for the bar as opposed to law firm practice. It's again, it's about people, and how do we continue to attract the best people? How do we make sure that the talent pool that we have is both maintained, but also appreciated in the wider world? The advocacy training here at the bar is a wonder to behold. So my experience here is not that different from what it was before I came to the bar, although it may be that on occasion it feels like herding cats, because the bar prides itself on the independence. Technically, each of the barristers in chambers is technically self-employed.
Okay, thank you very much.
Could you tell me about your next steps at your profession?
Well, I think partly because I had an English wife, and at the time my law firm had a very small presence outside of New York, a small office in London. I was invited to go to that office, in fact, to increase the size of that office by 50%. My joining that office, or transferring to that office, took the head count from 2 to 3, so a sizable increase. And that was an interesting thing, to come from this massive Wall Street powerhouse, resourced as it was, to the smaller overseas branch. But it was a huge challenge there, and it stretched me in a different way, but stretched me nonetheless, to have to be able to deal with the versatility of a small office servicing our clients abroad. In that, one of the opportunities that came from that was that at a time none of the major English law firms practiced U.S. law, and I quickly became a U.S. lawyer, U.S. counsel, a resource to be drawn on by those English firms, and got to know them well. Well, there was a rule change some years later that permitted English law firms, for the first time, to include in their ranks non-English qualified partners. It was a rule change. It was, interestingly, as we sit here in contemplation of perhaps a post-Brexit world, driven by the EU, which viewed legal services, like so many other services, as services which should move freely within the European Union. And the idea that the old rule that precluded English solicitors from partnering with non-English solicitors precluded, for example, their partnering with French lawyers or German lawyers. Well, that rule had to be therefore relaxed as an EU requirement. And when that happened, one of the English law firms said to themselves, well, French, German, yes, we can see over time partnering with lawyers from those jurisdictions, but if it doesn't have to be English, we'd like to start by bringing in a U.S. law partner. That would be a powerful combination. And so Allen&Overy, one of the so-called magic circle firms, approached me, and we began a discussion which led to my becoming the first non-English qualified partner at Allen&Overy. That was a huge challenge. I mean, our U.S. law group at the time consisted of just one lawyer and was meant to compete effectively with the leading Wall Street practices in an area, capital markets, where they were strongest. But we took on the challenge. I went to the leading U.S. law schools to recruit, and by the time I retired from the Allen&Overy partnership, we counted our U.S. lawyer headcount in hundreds rather than a single lawyer. And at one stage, it had been reported to me that we were the largest U.S. law practice in London, even by reference to the U.S. headquartered law firms that had a presence there. Well, we had a retirement age back then at Allen&Overy, and I bumped up against it. But I had been guest lecturing at my old alma mater, the London School of Economics, for many years. And I was approached by senior members of the law faculty there who knew that I had this retirement age looming. And they said to me, well, actually, old's okay if you're a professor. So I was given the opportunity and flattered by it to come and join the law faculty as a visiting professor, which I did for several years. Then there was a rule change here at the bar. And this Chambers, in the same way that Allen&Overy was keen to have the first U.S. law partner in London, this Chambers was keen to have the first non-barrister member of Chambers. And once again, I was flattered to be considered. One thing led to the next, and here I sit as the first non-barrister joint head of Chambers. So you're beginning to see, I think, Alexander, that in my career, it's been in no small part the luck of being in a right place at a right time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm wondering, what is the key difference between English lawyer and American lawyer?
Well, I have huge respect for the lawyers that I've met in both jurisdictions, and frankly for lawyers whom when I meet them around the world. I think the great success of the English profession is, and I think this could be said of the United States, that certainly until now, it has achieved tremendously in attracting the best and brightest talent at entry level. Some might say even overachieved. But you know, there is cultural differences which play through. Both are adversarial systems. I think there is a measure of civility that runs through the English bar that I'm a great admirer of, and it's been noticeable to me that in the time spent of late going back to U.S. courtrooms, sometimes, frequently as an expert witness, that there is adversarial system there means the gloves come off in a way that is less often seen in an English courtroom. But again, it's not taking away from the fact that English lawyers and U.S. lawyers, divided as they may be by their accents, are nevertheless, the best of them are, it's a privilege to watch. It's, for me, I would rather watch the talent in the courtroom, even to going to the theater on the West End, because you know, you really can't but admire the performance of any number of the lawyers that I've had the privilege of watching up close.
Okay. At the 1990s and later, as I know, you've been to Moscow.
I've been to Moscow.
What did you do there? Did you walking around, walking to cathedrals, or you walked there?
Well, I would have been thrilled to come as a tourist. There's an awful lot that has had a huge appeal to me in that respect. I think walking across Red Square with the snow lightly falling is one of the most magical experiences that one can have. But it was work that took me, and has taken me on several occasions to Moscow. Again, a thrill, partly because if you go far enough back in my family history, there is a Russian connection. But I came in the 90s really because of the global marketplace that was, for me, the center of my practice, the derivatives markets and the interest in those in Russia. In fact, one of my early trips, it may have been my first trip, created the opportunity to appear before the Duma, and at a time when there was a lot of interest there in the regulation of the financial markets and generally in derivatives in particular. I've come back several times. Most recently, we've had the privilege of providing a measure of technical assistance as part of broader legal training and education, continuing education courses that have involved the judges at what was at the time the Supreme Arbitrage Court, and 2 visits there, and it was for me again exciting because of the talent in the room and the interest. And there have been a number of recent cases, not just in Russia but abroad, which were of interest to the judges in Russia, and those are. While we've been invited to come to share information, they were as much learning experiences as they were training experiences when I look at what I took away from those sessions.
You told me about your Russian connections.
Oh, right.
And could you tell more detailed about this topic?
Well, Alexander, I can only share with you the information as it's come down to me. And it's an oral history, so in the telling, you just don't know how accurate the detail is. But as I understand it, and I pause to say, you're going to probably think I come from a long line of cowards, because as I understand it, going back to Tsarist Russia, there was a rule that all but the eldest son in the family, all sons but the eldest son, would be drafted into the Tsar's army. The eldest son being allowed to stay at home to help with the family business or the farm, as the case may be. Now, the story as it's been told to me was that, again, back at that time, there was 2 farmers. There was a farmer named something like Sashar, and there was a farmer named Golden. Now, Farmer Sashar had 2 sons, and down the road from him was Farmer Golden, who had 2 daughters. And apparently there was some negotiation. Farmer Sashar suggested to Farmer Golden that he would probably be well served by having a son to help him with his farm, his family business. And in turn, Farmer Sachar would hate to lose a son to the Tsar's army. So they did a swap. And we apparently descended from the Sachar, who became a Golden to avoid the draft. Now, that's a story which has intrigued me, because as it turned out, as you may know, my practice area is derivatives, or the largest part of that marketplace consists of swaps. So I used to tell people that swaps, it runs in my blood.
Your Russian blood.
My Russian blood.
We're talking about your family, and do anybody from your family became a lawyer?
Anybody.
Anybody.
Well, my wife's a judge. My youngest child, my daughter, my baby, is a young barrister just across the quad from where we sit at another chamber set. My middle son is a lawyer in Washington, and his wife is a lawyer also in Washington. My older son, who I thought would be the lawyer, his people skills are huge, but he's a very talented and cool guy, and he and his wife are both in the arts. He's an actor, director, and writer, and she's an actress, but she played the part of a barrister on TV.
Okay.
So I think that's at least
A great deal of your relatives are lawyers. Great.
Ever to the front.
I think you like to be the first in many areas. Aren't you the first non-barrister who is co-head of barristers' chambers?
Yes, you think people would learn from their mistakes, and I do enjoy being first. It probably goes back to having been a student at university in the 60s. Now, see, you missed that, Constantine.
That was before my time.
It was great, but we thought we were revolutionaries then, and as we've just been talking, I think there's been a lot of revolutionary change in the legal profession since, and it's been one of my favorite poets is the American poet Robert Frost, who has a poem in which they talk about two roads diverging in the woods, and I took the one less traveled by, and that made all the difference. So it does get exciting when there's no road maps. You feel that you're at the cutting edge, and things are a little different. But there was a rule change here at the bar a few years back, and by that time I had retired from Allen&Overy, taken up a teaching post at the London School of Economics, just across the road from where we sit, but spending a lot of time in courts as an expert witness. Had an arbitration practice, and it was suggested to me by another brave lot, the people here at Three Hair Court, that it might be fun to be first again. The rule change permitted a non-barrister to become a member of chambers, and so I was invited to take up that offer, which I gladly did. A few years later, I think possibly because of the experience of having built something as we did at Allen&Overy, there was again a knock on the door. Would I have interest in becoming the first non-barrister joint head of chambers? Now the trade press has since then suggested, things change very slowly here at the bar. We're sitting in an area that's very much unchanged for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
There's been a comparison in the trade press recently between Meghan Markle and myself as two Americans who've come in and maybe shaken up these venerable English traditions and institutions. But all I can say is it's been a very exciting opportunity, and I hope I've helped build bridges between the experiences you and I had in big law and the opportunities that confront the bar today. And I certainly have learned a lot by being here.
I think of all the people I met in retirement, you are the busiest by far. I think there is another new project, or relatively new project, that you have in your retirement, which is Prime Finance. Could you tell us more about that one?
I'm glad you raised Prime Finance, because that really is a special opportunity. I've probably done myself a disservice by, at various times, attempting to do too many things, and perhaps as a result not doing any as well as might be the case if it had my full attention. But my wife says to me that if I were to let go of everything, I should stay involved with Prime, because we I think all of us involved in that project hope and think that it's a project whose time is right and is making a positive difference. So let me tell you a bit. Prime Finance, that stands for the Panel of Recognized International Market Experts in Finance. It's a reaction to the global financial crisis of 2008. I had made a speech in The Hague at the time about, with the backdrop of the International Court of Justice, the World Court, did we need a World Court for Finance? And as it turned out, that was the papers were published only weeks before first Bear Stearns, and a couple months later, Lehman Brothers found themselves in financial straits, and the cases flowed quickly after that. The thing was that the global reaction to the crisis, in no small part, had been an effort in regulatory reform. And regulation, in turn, in no small part, is about preventive medicine. And that's important. It's important in our personal lives. It's important in when we think about the health of the financial markets. But by analogy, I thought to myself, well, but accidents do happen. Things will go wrong. And are we giving enough attention to the courts, which, by analogy, were our hospitals? Were they adequately resourced? Did the judges get the support they needed to be able to work their magic when there was a problem, a dispute that needed resolution? And so Prime Finance does three things. One, we've gathered talent from around the world. Very often, as people approach their retirement years, but with the experience that they have, we now have approximately 200 experts on this panel of recognized international market experts who collectively have more than 6,000 years of relevant experience, and that's a lot of talent.
That's like the history of mankind.
Well,
under one umbrella.
You know, the history of mankind is in no small part a struggle for survival, and we really need to ask ourselves: are we doing all that we can to make sure that our position is sustainable? But the experts come from around the world, from your home country, from mine, from the country that we sit in, from Asia, from Africa, from South America, and they stand ready to help resolve disputes, either as experts brought into disputes, as arbitrators or mediators dealing directly with disputes in that capacity. We've also have working with one of the data service providers have produced a database of relevant precedent from around the world, which supports our experts, supports the courts in their activities. And most interestingly, and in a gratifying way that has really taken off, we also provide technical assistance, training, and support for judges around the world. That's brought me, as you know, 2 times to Russia, but it's brought me 4 times to the United States. We've done that in the highest courts in Singapore, Japan, Korea, China. In a couple weeks' time, we'll be, for the second time, in Portugal. And soon after that, we're scheduled to go to Ghana in Africa. So Prime, again, another ambitious undertaking, but somebody clever once said, you're only as good as the company that you keep, and I keep some pretty impressive company with the other experts involved in the Prime project.
So now we're going to see one of the attractions of the Middle Temple, other than the barristers, of course.
Yes, but we've just crossed a boundary, so we're now in Inner Temple.
All right.
Leaving Middle Temple behind us. The broader area is called Temple, and we're going to see Temple Church, which again serves as a church for both inns.
Please. So there is some connection to Hollywood, I think, that church has. Could you tell us about it?
The Da Vinci Code, in the film, the church features prominently. The church has got actually quite a history, and as we'll see...
So here's the church.
Here's the church. This church goes back to the 12th century, and in the legal world, we all speak with
Shall we walk around?
hushed tones about the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta was sealed at Runnymede, and by the way, that happened we just celebrated the 800th anniversary of that event.
Yes, of course.
But it was actually negotiated in this church. So this church predates the Inns of Court that now surround it. They came a couple hundred years later, the lawyers, but the church
let's stand in the front.
Is relatively has survived, and so we're now in front of Temple Church. Construction in the round replicates a similar construction in Jerusalem, and I think Dan Brown in the Da Vinci Code seems to suggest that there was almost a pagan design to it. But this is the lawyer's church now,
and home for Magna Carta, as one may say. That's where Magna Carta was constituted,
was negotiated here, sealed in Runnymede, and I know the dates by heart because we just celebrated the 800th anniversary. So that sealing happened in 1215, and 2015 was the 800th anniversary.
So that's where history was made, at this very place.
That's exactly
very
right.
Impressive.
Now this site has another significance for me. If you look across to the far end of the church, you see a building with the ground floor is white. It stands out from the brickwork above it. That is another chamber set, Francis Taylor Building, where proudly he says, "My daughter is a young barrister."
All right. So now, tell us about your family. So your children have chosen the path of lawyers
well,
as well?
I talked about this with Alexander.
Okay,
yesterday.
so you covered that. That's fine.
We were in front of Temple Church with the inner temple hall behind us. We're now standing in front of Middle Temple. There are 4 Inns of Court, Middle Temple being one, Inner Temple a second, Lincoln's Inn, and Gray's Inn. This is actually my inn, and as you know, because you've been my guest, we lunch in a room which is pretty spectacular. Of course, many people would walk into it and think they had walked onto the set of Hogwarts and Harry Potter.
That's what I thought.
Right.
That's exactly what I thought.
But in fact, that is the same room in which Shakespeare's play Twelfth Night was performed for the first time. So we're talking about an Elizabethan construction, an Elizabethan hall. The high table, the table that the benchers sit at, was the gift of Queen Elizabeth, but not Queen Elizabeth today, Queen Elizabeth I.
All right.
It's one tree. It comes from one single tree, floated down the Thames, and they couldn't complete construction of the building until they could get the table into place. But the hall has particular interest. The Middle Temple has particular interest to me as an American because of the close ties historically that have existed between the United States and Middle Temple. I say the United States, actually it's America. The Middle Temple, it predates the United States. 5 Middle Templars, 5 members of the Inn, signed the Declaration of Independence, and 7 signed the Constitution. And at the time, any number of explorers, we can Sir Walter Raleigh and others were members as well.
So, yet again, we're in the middle of world's history here. And was that building heavily destroyed during the Second World War?
It was badly damaged and reconstructed very carefully, but with, again, financial support from the legal profession in America as well as here. It was not as badly damaged as was Inner Temple, which is really pretty much a new building. This is a reconstructed.
Yeah, here you can feel centuries behind you, so it feels intact to me, at least.
It's very, very inspiring, and the inns have a number of important functions. People are called to the bar by their inn. There is training and grooming that happens here that is designed to produce the best advocates possible. But it's a place that keeps us all focused on ethics and civility. And I can't tell you how many times I've come to an event, often in black tie, often wearing gowns, and come out of there just feeling better for the experience, feeling proud to be a lawyer.
I know the feeling. Thank you, Jeff.
Jeffrey, thank you very much for your interview. And I have some presents from Russia, from Moscow with law. Here are some books about Russian law in English. And here is a special cup with our logo and with our words, don't judge the lawyers, they're people too.
Well, Alexander, it's been an honor and a privilege. I should be thanking you for the opportunity, but these are books that are cover ground of great interest to me, as you must have known, and of course, lawyers are people. Thank you very much.
Thank you.